Welcome to Finding Certainty with your host and U.S. Army veteran, Patrick Laing. Over the next hour, you'll learn from Patrick and his expert guests how to attract more certainty into your business and your life. Now, here is your host, Patrick Laing.
Welcome to Finding Certainty, everyone. This is Patrick, and I'm very pleased to have special guest today, Miss Natasha Rogoff. She's an award-winning television producer, filmmaker, and journalist. And today we're going to, among other things, we're going to be talking about her experience taking the Muppets to Russia. And she wrote a book about it, Muppets in Moscow, The Unexpected Crazy True Story of Making Sesame Street in Russia. So Natasha, thanks for being here today. Really looking forward to hearing your story and helping our listeners get to know you a little bit.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Nice to meet you too, Patrick.
My pleasure. We're both broadcasting from a hotel room today. You're in New York and I'm in Dallas for a conference. So appreciate you fitting us in even while you're on the road.
My pleasure.
So I always start out our show explaining a couple of reasons why I've invited this specific guest. And you have a long list of accolades. I mean, you even won a Telly Award for your documentary, The Hollywood's Architect, the Paul R. Williams story, to my understanding. That's a big deal. Natasha is an associate at Harvard in their art, film, and visual studies department. And you've been all over the world. But the two main reasons I invited Natasha to be on Finding Certainty today is your story really embodies what we stand for here at Finding Certainty. First and foremost, it's about overcoming challenges, being able to think outside the box and consider new relationships and new approaches and so forth in order to find success. If we want to find certainty, we most certainly have to do that. The second, though, is that one of our pillars is that we have to work together. We have to look past our differences. We have to link arms if we want to accomplish more. If we focus on how we differ, we usually are not going to be able to accomplish nearly as much. But if we focus on what we have in common and our similarities, amazing things can happen. So why don't we just start out by having you tell us a little bit about your background? What led to you actually taking the Muppets into Russia?
Well, it was a journey that was completely unexpected, as I was a filmmaker for many years, working in what was then the Soviet Union in the 1980s. And I went there when I was 22 years old to study Russian language at the local university in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg.
Right.
And was thoroughly fascinated by other cultures and especially by, dictatorships and, had read so much about World War II because my family had left Europe, in the early part of the century, and we still had family there as well. So, the idea of that part of the country, Belarus, Russia, Ukraine, now being, under the umbrella of communism just fascinated me, from the time I was a teenager. And then I, decided to study Russian, and I went to University of California at Berkeley. And there was a great program where we had a cultural exchange for Americans from many different universities. There were 30 Americans in Moscow and 30 in what was then Leningrad. And we were able to study at the university. So that's how I first came to Russia. And of course, once there, fell in love with the people, the culture. It was so engrossing, so different, and from my own country, that I just wanted to write about it and make films about it, which is what I did for the next 10 years until the Soviet Union collapsed. And at that point, I had made a film which had predicted the coup that overthrew the Soviet Empire. and two Sesame Street executives came to that screening in New York City at my then graduate school, where I went to school for Soviet foreign policy, nuclear strategy, which is what I was studying while not making films. And they showed up and said, "Hey, watch the film." And then they said, "Would you like to help us bring the Muppets to Moscow?" Because then Senator Biden had spearheaded congressional approval for a Russian version, an original version of Sesame Street, to be made in Moscow with Russians, Ukrainians, everybody would be part of it. And with the support of the Russian Ministry of, oh my gosh, Ministry of Education. So, I looked at them and I said, "Did you just watch this film that you just sat through, and where I was embedded with hardline conservatives who were working every angle they could to keep the Soviet Union from imploding?" I was like, "Yeah, it's like a very serious film." And I was like, "The Muppets? I don't see the connection, But anyway, they were amazing. They said, "Well, look, we've been trying to do this for a while. We have a strong interest from the Congress, and maybe you can help." So yeah, I went down to their headquarters, and it was, there was Big Bird painted on the wall, and there were all these really earnest young people. By this time I was 32. And the energy was incredible. So as I learned about what, Sesame Workshop does, then the Children's Television Workshop, which is a nonprofit, does around the world, I thought, wow, this could have such a tremendous impact on, the millions of children living across 11 time zones. So I think I was pretty hooked from the beginning. And then when they explained that the Muppets would be, the best ambassadors for idealistic values, to model ideas of freedom of expression, tolerance, inclusivity. So this was completely different from anything I had ever done in my life, but very exciting.
Well, I think it's fascinating. I think some people looking at the title and wondering what do the Muppets have to do with a business channel, and yet it's about overcoming odds. It's about creating these relationships and these connections between very different cultures and two completely different countries, and yet you talk about tolerance. You talk about the Muppets being ambassadors for these principles. It's very interesting to me. Your education is phenomenal. You went to Berkeley, you attended in Leningrad, got your master's at Columbia, is my understanding, and now you're teaching at Harvard. And yet this came about without a lot of planning. It isn't something you set out to do or something that you planned to do in your career. It just kind of fell in your lap. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely fair. I mean, it's not, I think it's fascinating because many young people ask me today, what's your advice, your career advice to, follow your dreams, to realize what you hope to do in your life. And of course, my path was incredibly random. I would say the only, principle that guided it was, always to follow what I was passionate about. And it seemed to, generally work out. But definitely there were times when it was, lean times, and, especially when you're making documentaries, it's very difficult to make a living and pay your rent.
Right.
But, if it's, I just feel that if you're passionate about something, there's a way to find other people who are passionate about the same thing. And then you can, build a great team and you can make things happen.
I couldn't agree more. That seems to be a recurring theme throughout all of my guests. I mean, we've had billionaires on our show. We've had other television producers like Gary Reeves. And 2 weeks ago, we had the founder and dean of the Paul Mitchell schools. So we've had a wide variety of guests, but this theme of passion is very much a recurring principle. So what was it like? I mean, I know when you decided to take on this project and they were impressed by what you'd done, it was very much a pivot or a different focus for you. But when you took it into Muppets, it wasn't an easy path, right? It was probably one of the most challenging times and I think assignments that any journalist has ever had. And yet you met with some amazing success. So what was it like? I mean, what was the most difficult part perhaps of the assignment?
I believe the hardest part was probably assembling the team and raising the money. So even though we had funds appropriated by the U.S. Congress, several million, we had to match the funding because the Congress demanded, and USAID, the agency responsible for aid internationally, that the Russians had skin in the game. So we actually had to match the US funding. And in this market, as you said, it was a time of incredible instability, transition, very painful for many Soviet citizens as their country was being torn apart, and various parts of what was once a united empire, the Soviet Union, countries were, breaking off and declaring their independence, former republics like Georgia, Ukraine, Armenia. And for many people who had lived their entire life for 70 years under this Soviet system, under communism, these were brothers, even though there was a great deal of discrimination against a lot of people, particularly of color, living in what was then the Soviet Union. These they were all part of one country, and generally they spoke Russian. They spoke their own native languages too, but everybody spoke Russian. It was taught, since Stalin's time. Many people were murdered as a result of that, but it did happen. So it was really difficult. It was also difficult getting food at the time and taking care of your loved ones or your elderly parents, because there was, the healthcare system was collapsing. So it was into this environment that we brought the idea of making a children's TV show with puppets. And we met really difficult challenges. The first, as I mentioned, was raising the money, where our first sponsor, who we got a go-ahead with, who was going to commit a great deal of money to the production. He was a Russian oligarch, and he was gaining a lot of power of the local TV station, which was Russia's largest TV station that disseminated across 11 time zones. So after meeting with him for a meeting that took months to set up, he agreed after, we spoke about Big Bird and the other Muppets and how Big Bird wouldn't be in the show because there would be original Slavic style Muppets design that would reflect Russian culture and values and aesthetics. And we were so excited about this happening. And then 3 weeks after that meeting, his car was blown up in a bombing. And he was, we found out quite a bit later, but he was severely burned. And he obviously was no longer, paying much attention to making this puppet show because he had way bigger problems. So we dealt with enormous amounts of violence, which I write about in the book. I mean, you don't really think of, making a children's television show in Russia and, bombings, assassinations. But this is what happened. And our office was taken over by soldiers with AK-47s. So, when I wrote this, I just thought it was such a remarkable story that really needed to be shared now. And aside from the violence, the other aspect that we had to deal with were what you alluded to before, cultural clashes. So what is it like when you are trying to make a new TV show And, the people who are the creative team that is making the show they are coming from different backgrounds. Right. And the team that we're working with is coming from 70 years of communism and ideology, communist ideology, a socialist system. And we are coming from Sesame Street's progressive, way of seeing the world, as well as a democracy with rule of law, a constitution. These elements were not present in the post-Soviet society at that time. So how did we find commonality, to make puppets, to design a new set, a new neighborhood that reflected what was going to be new Russian values? Not just Russian. When I say Russian, I mean post-Soviet for the entire former Soviet Union, because the show, as I mentioned, was distributed ultimately to Ukraine, Armenia, Georgia, and throughout the former Soviet Union.
Well, it's interesting because I think as Americans, many of us have a limited understanding. We think of America as the only melting pot, right? But Russia has all these different cultures, different nationalities, many of whom are from Russia itself. Others have immigrated there. Others have intermarried. There's all these different republics, and a lot of culture there, a lot of layers of culture. And so we're coming up on our first break here, but I think it's this story itself, it has so many different layers and different aspects to it that I think at first people think, well, Muppets in Moscow, taking the Sesame Street to Russia, that seems like that would be pretty easy, right? But it wasn't. And when we come back, I want to get into a little bit more of what the challenges that you met, how you overcame them. As a big part of what our show is about how we overcome the challenges, because whether you're in business, you're in television producing, and you're in a marriage, there are principles that apply. You even had a baby, and I saw a picture of you holding your baby while you're working on your project, this newborn, and that adds a whole nother element or layer to what you did. So this is very interesting to me. I think I've read into it, and I've done a little bit of research on your story, but the layers the challenges you overcame and the layers that make up this story are just absolutely extraordinary. So we're visiting with.
Thank you for saying that.
Well, it's amazing to me. We're visiting with Natasha Rogoff. She is the best-selling author of Muppets in Moscow, and we're going to go to our first break. But when we get back, we will continue the conversation. So don't go away.
Become our friend on Facebook. Post your thoughts about our shows and network on our timeline. Visit facebook.com/Voice America.
Certainty Management can help create more certainty in your life with our deep discount health insurance options, even for 1099s, part-time employees, volunteers, and more. Pay less to protect yourself, your loved ones, and your team. Call 888-684-3122 for a free quote today. That's 888-684-3122. Visit us on the web at CertaintyTeam.com. That's Certainty, TEAM, like Mary.com.
Have you become a member yet? Sign up now to become a member of Voice America. It's always free and easy. Plus, you get to take advantage of some great member benefits. Get unlimited access to millions of hours of on-demand content across all of our channels. Keep track of your favorite episodes, shows, and hosts in your own customizable library. Find out what shows you might be interested in based on your favorites. Plus, you get insider access with our newsletter. Membership gives you more. Sign up at voiceamerica.com and click register at the top right.
If you're a nonprofit in need of funding, we can help. Certainty Management is a cost reduction firm that also helps churches, schools, sports teams, and other nonprofits raise unlimited zero-cost funding. Best of all, you don't have to sell anything or ask for donations. Call 888-684-3122 to learn more today. That's 888-684-3122. Visit us on the web at CertaintyTeam.com. That's Certainty, Team, like Mary.com.
Voice America Business Network, the bottom line in business.
You are listening to Finding Certainty with Patrick Laing. Have a question for Patrick or his guests? Join us on the show at 866-472-5790. That's 866-472-5790. Now, back to the show with Patrick.
Welcome back, everyone. We're visiting with Natasha Lance Rogoff. She's a producer and director, a writer of multiple television documentaries and children's programming for over 25 years, best-selling author of Muppets in Moscow. So, Natasha, we've been talking a little bit about how this assignment, this project to take the Muppets to Russia came about unexpectedly. You decided it was a good opportunity, and so you tackled it. And yet you were met with a lot of obstacles, you and your team. You talked about assassination attempts and a car bombing of your investor. And I mean, I read something about getting a call from the people at the studio screaming, "There's soldiers here with AK-47s." And I mean, this is not normal stuff. The most
not your average children's television puppet show.
And yet you talk about taking the Muppets to Russia. It was much more than just a television show. The Muppets, in a very real sense, were a model, and you use the word ambassador, which I love that, but they were a model of a free and open society. They were modeling these principles that in many respects were new and foreign to the Russian people coming out of the Soviet Union. This is post USSR, right? Mm-hmm. I find that really fascinating because you wouldn't think of that on a geopolitical scale of the Muppets as being the catalyst to making such change come about. And I want to talk a little bit later about the Russian-Ukraine war and how you feel that movement, having kids that grew up watching the Muppets, how that has affected how they're feeling today. Because I think there are some very powerful repercussions, if you will, ripple effects that came out of that. But let's talk a little bit more about the process. When you talked about how you needed to put together a team, and you really had to create all new characters. You weren't just bringing Bert and Ernie over in Big Bird. You were creating puppets, aka Muppets, that were entirely new. They had to have Russian culture, Russian personalities, leanings, etc. So let's talk about that, because I think it's a really interesting piece of this pie.
It is fascinating that Sesame Workshop, which is a nonprofit working around the world, doesn't just import Sesame Street. The whole approach is to design the show in collaboration with local producers, television professionals, artists, and to, create a program that's going to be successful in that country, but also is developed with their own values in mind. And that was particularly challenging in Russia, as, you can expect that the progressive values of Sesame Street might bump up against 400 years of, rather conservative Russian thought. But at the same time, the country, Soviet Union, was also very progressive in many ways. And so, it had both the combination of being a radical socialist country and also, an oppressive country. So we were dealing with that legacy in trying to develop the new puppets and the design for the show and the content. the way that happens is in the curriculum seminar, which is the cornerstone of every international Sesame Street production, where you bring together the creative team and educators. So these are teachers, professors, children's education experts, and together the group decides what are going to be the goals of the show. What do you actually want to teach children in this new, post-Soviet society? And it was in the context of that where we were developing initially ideas for, what were the Muppets going to look like? What was the show going to look like? But there were a number of ways in which we were surprised by the initial scripts, for instance. So, some of the early scripts were very abstract, and the writers, the initial head writer only wanted to have former representatives of the Soviet Union of Writers. So because that was a, professional organization, and she wasn't keen to have, younger people submitting spec scripts. That's a very, normal thing in America. You would open it up, to people to, to get a fresh perspective. But that wasn't the case in Russia initially. And so, we ended up getting scripts that were like 10 pages long for a short comedy bit. And, one example is a storyboard where they wanted to teach the letter D for depression. So, that took a while. But I have to say, in the creation of the Muppets, when we first showed the video of the Sesame Street clips, our creative team did not like the Muppets. They thought they didn't look Russian. They looked very strange. The Muppets that Jim Henson created were, they did not look like traditional Russian puppets, often made of wood, that were marionettes with like exaggerated features. His were more like, soft, very often made of foam or fur. And our team was like, we don't want to use those. We want to use our own puppets. We have a tradition, a very long puppetry tradition that dates back to the 16th century. So, why would we need your American Muppets, So even though we were going to be adapting the show and developing original content as well as new Muppets in a set, the idea was I was, instructed by Sesame Street, they still had to be Muppets. We weren't going to be throwing in, a bunch of other puppets. But the idea was that these newly created Muppets would not be exactly like the American Muppets. They would reflect their own, folklore and ideas. And eventually that happened. It took months and nearly caused World War III, the fight over the Muppets. But basically what happened in the end is that, once the team visited the US and they saw the Muppets, as well as the role that Sesame Street played in American society in terms of, moving the country towards greater acceptance of racial integration and all sorts of other really wonderful things that the team wanted for their own country, they thought, well, we can maybe make these Muppets, design them, but in our own aesthetic, with our own ideas. And they did that. They made the full body puppet, that replaces Big Bird in their show, was based on a 600-year-old character out of Russian folklore called Domovoy, who is a spirit of the hearth and the home, who protects the home. And this character is usually drawn as like an old man with like fiery, beady eyes. And in this case, eventually they made this character into a kind of like hound-like blue, furry character with floppy ears and a giant schnauz. schnoz, and he had pieces of fur and twigs sewn into his coat so that he was a spirit of nature as well. And he lived inside a giant tree on the set with a little post box on the front. So, the idea of this Muppet, if you see him, and you can see him online, it's magnificent. He's a magnificent Muppet puppet. Wow, and his name is Zeli Boba.
That's amazing. As you created these characters and were able to weave the history of Russia in with the Muppet concept and the Muppet magic, did it occur to you at the time that you were making history, that you were doing something that would have far-reaching effects? Because oftentimes we have 20/20 hindsight. We look back at things and think, wow, look at what we were a part of. But did you feel that while you were doing it? Were people aware of it?
Yeah, I mean, no, it's a great question. I worked with about 400 artists in Moscow from all over the former Soviet Union. And I believe we all felt like that. We had a sense of, at the time, that, and particularly because of the obstacles we were facing, having our office shut down, having people who were helping us and had committed to broadcasting the show being assassinated. Everybody understood the stakes of what we were doing. And it sounds absurd, like when you think about it. Okay, what are the stakes of making a children's comedy puppet show? But it really felt like that. And it's hard to imagine, at least I felt this way maybe, 5 years ago. It's hard to imagine the, what we all felt in terms of the role that Ulitsa Sezam, which is the name of Sesame Street in Russian, could play in helping millions of children to, thrive in a new, more open society. But I have to say, now with the war having started, once again, I see the value of these, soft power types of incredible collaborations. It brings it home even more poignantly what we did at that time together as a team. And I'm in touch with many of my former colleagues, on WhatsApp today, because of course, when we were making the program, the internet was just starting and none of us had cell phones, and our Russian colleagues barely, if ever, used a computer. So it's a very different time now. And yet, when I look back on that time, which is partially why I wanted to write this story now, is I understood what we had done together as a team was remarkable. Not only in terms of a business success, but also in terms of, what this program did to change the country. So
I can imagine. That was the first thing that I thought of when I looked at the book and I read your story and was introduced to you. I thought, wow, this is just an extraordinary tale that has, as I said, repercussions, ripple effects that are continuing to this day. I read commentaries and feedback on different perspectives of how the Muppets have actually transformed the culture in ways, of course. Now, just from a business standpoint, I know they froze your account at one point. You had 200 people you were trying to pay, and suddenly
not just once. That happened several times, during the course of production, because at this time there weren't Western banks in Russia, and so transferring money to what was then the Soviet Union, just after their government had collapsed, the Soviet government, and the new one was organizing itself. It was very difficult to do business and just manage the most basic things, of paying people.
I can imagine. How did you how did you accomplish it? I mean, any business owner who's listening to this has been through financial challenges, at least when they were starting out, many to this day. How did you tackle it? When you run up against a problem, what is Natasha's methodology for addressing it, overcoming it, getting around it, and ultimately succeeding? Do you have a secret formula?
Yes, ask for advice. Always depend on the people around you, who are familiar with the country. And I had a wonderful partner in this, Leonid Zagalski, who was my very longtime friend. And of course, we, asked people all the time, how do we get past this? This wasn't a unique problem to our business and operation. It was the same problem every business was having in post-Soviet society. And people were coming up with really creative ways to pay people in the country, because not only was the ruble devaluing, daily, and so if you transferred money into a bank account, it was immediately converted into rubles, and so the value of your Western currency would be devalued. So that wasn't an option. So you had to come up with other ways, and there were so many different avenues that you could take. But in our case, we wanted to partner with a Russian business so that the payments could be done through that company. And there were a number of reasons why, which are complicated but have to do with Russian law at the time.
That makes sense. So I know you had all these external pressures, danger, violence, funds being frozen, and so forth. But you were also getting pressure from internally, from the Sesame workshop. They were concerned that if this did not go well, it would be catastrophic for their brand, is my understanding. So how did you convince them to keep going? We have about 2 minutes until our next break.
Yeah. Sesame Workshop was amazing in terms of, agreeing to do this in the first place. And the person who initially started us all down this road was Gary Nell, who was the former CEO of Nat Geo. And he became the CEO of Sesame Workshop as well. But at the time when he hired me, this was really a visionary idea that he had come up with a group of senators. And, it was brilliant. But as with any corporation, when you engage risk, there are people inside the company that raise red flags and indicate, if people are getting killed, or, you have to take a level of risk that is uncomfortable for the company and may jeopardize the brand, they will speak out and say, hey, are we really doing the right thing? And is this the smartest decision? Now, I say that today with hindsight, but when I was doing the show at the time and had very little corporate experience, of course, it was very challenging for me because I didn't know how to navigate that. And I was lucky enough that my boss, Baxter Urist, who was running the international division, was pitch hitting in there for the show and protected me in a lot of ways from the corporate battles that were going on. So I was fighting it here, he was fighting it up here, and it wasn't easy, and it was very painful. It was, believe me, if you talk to my husband about what I was like during that time and how difficult it was living with me because of the stress I was under, I'm very appreciative to him that he was so balanced and wonderful, gave me really excellent advice about how to, calm down when all this was going on.
I can only imagine. So you had an advocate at corporate and you had an advocate at home, and you were an advocate for the show and the people. We need to go to another break real quick, but we're visiting with Natasha Lance Rogoff. I'm really enjoying your story, Natasha. So many layers to it, as I said. When we come back, let's talk a little bit about your views on the Russian and Ukraine war, and I'd love to get your views on Russia as a country and the people. You shared a little bit of it earlier, but I know you have a deep love, and I have many friends who are Russian. They're an extraordinary people, and yet I think there are misconceptions, especially with this war going on, and misunderstandings that need to be clarified and addressed. So let's go to break real quick, but don't go away, everyone. We'll be right back.
Follow us on Twitter at VoiceAmericaTRN. Get the lowdown on guests, new shows, and your favorites. That's VoiceAmericaTRN.
If you're a nonprofit in need of funding, we can help. Certainty Management is a cost reduction firm that also helps churches, schools, sports teams, and other nonprofits raise unlimited zero-cost funding. Best of all, you don't have to sell anything or ask for donations. Call 888-684-3122 to learn more today. That's 888-684-3122. Visit us on the web at CertaintyTeam.com. That's Certainty, Team, like Mary.com.
Voice America programs are now available on your favorite connected device, including Amazon, Alexa, and Google Home. Through streams with Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, and iHeartRadio, listening to your favorite show is as easy as saying the show name followed by the word podcast.
Hey, Alexa, play Finding Your Frequency podcast.
If that doesn't work, try adding on TuneIn or on iHeartRadio or on Apple Podcasts.
Certainty Management can help create more certainty in your life with our deep discount health insurance options, even for 1099s, part-time employees, volunteers, and more. Pay less to protect yourself, your loved ones, and your team. Call 888-684-3122 for a free quote today. That's 888-684-3122. Visit us on the web at CertaintyTeam.com. That's Certainty, Team, like Mary.com. You are listening to Finding Certainty with Patrick Laing. Have a question for Patrick or his guests? Join us on the show at 866-472-5790. That's 866-472-5790. Now, back to the show with Patrick.
Welcome back, everyone. We're having a really fantastic conversation with Natasha Lance Rogoff, best-selling author of The Muppets in Moscow. And the tagline for that book is very revealing, Natasha. It's the unexpected, crazy, true story of making Sesame Street in Russia. There's a lot packed into that subtitle, isn't there?
Yes.
So
I think it's very true. I tried to write the truth.
I mean, unexpected, crazy, true. Yeah, I think you nailed it, just from what I'm learning here. But as you look back on it, what do you feel like was the greatest impact that the show had?
I thought about that a lot lately. As I was obsessively watching what was going on in Ukraine. And, it's just heartbreaking to see where we were 30 years ago, working side by side. And I was leading a team, with Russians, Ukrainians, all these people, Armenians, Georgians, everybody working together to make this children's comedy show. Mm-hmm. And to see what happened and where we are today, it's devastating. It's just incredibly heartbreaking. And it's heartbreaking for my former colleagues who were committed then and remained committed to, creating a different future for their country and for millions of children, not only through the show, but in everything they did in their lives, for the next 30 years. So speaking to them today, and, I would say in the early part of the war, when they could still speak fairly openly on the phone, they were heartbroken, just completely broken about what they were experiencing. So I remember waking up at one, like really, kind of jolting up at like 4 a.m. one morning. And this was after I had been watching the young people that were leaving Russia because they didn't want to fight and they didn't support the war. So it was like more than 1 million people that had walked out of their own country. And I was thinking about them. And then it suddenly occurred to me, oh, they're in their late 20s and 30s. They grew up on Ulica Sezam. Those are our children. I was just like, oh my God. I mean, it really gave me a sense of, we did make a difference. I know we made a difference because the show went on to become a huge hit, and it lasted for 10 years, well into Putin's era. And I meet people all over. And when I went back to Russia in January of 2020, that was the last time I was there to do interviews for the book. I was meeting young people who I would say, oh, by any chance, do you know Ulica Sezam, Sesame Street in Russian? And they'd be like, oh my goodness. And then they would break out into song and tell me who their favorite Muppet was, and talk about how much it influenced their lives. So I knew it had a tremendous impact. But then as I was sitting thinking about this even more, I realized that on the other side, in Ukraine, the same age cohort of people also grew up on Ulica Sezam. Mm-hmm. That these people who are fighting for their freedom and in continued independence from the Kremlin are also the Ulica Sezam generation. So, it gave me a sense of the impact that the show had, but also, I am familiar with so many people who, would like to see a different narrative and a different reality for Russia, and especially for their children and grandchildren.
I bet. But what would you like people to understand about the Russian people and the country itself, if you could say?
Well, I think pretty much what you alluded to before is that many people in America don't understand that Russia is a police state today. And they often expect that Russians can just go out and protest. But I'm talking to these people, on WhatsApp every day, and they can't. Many of them have been forced to leave because they did speak out against the war, and they had 24 hours to get out because Putin passed laws against speaking out against his special operation. You could get 15 years in prison. And if you're a young person, particularly a single mom, and you have to take care of children, you can't do that as strongly as you feel about the war and what it's doing to the people of Ukraine. You still have to make sure that you're taking care of your child. And so I think it's very important for people to understand that. As well as there are many, many, many Russians who support what I would think of as, values that are idealistic, that represent freedoms for their people. So I think it's very important to understand that this is a country of people. They're very passionate, very creative, and my experiences are mostly with the artistic community in Russia and beyond, but also the politicians and businessmen and people who have to deal with tremendous oppression in trying to live their normal lives.
Well, I think there's an interesting element I've seen. I have a lot of friends in Hollywood, and while values may be different and perspectives are different, in many respects are a voice of the people. They reflect the greater national viewpoints and perspectives. And there's obviously different narratives and different illustrations and so forth. But I think your work, working with the arts and community, you saw a broad swath of the Russian people. I know you worked with, you talk about working with politicians and business and so forth. But, I think as I look at what Russia is going through, and the Russian people, as well as the Ukrainian people, are being subjected to by the leadership that they don't agree with more often than not. I think a little bit of German Nazi Germany, right, where Germans were subjected to, so many of them were forced into the military, forced into this war that they did not agree with, and they paid the price for decades after. And so it's sad, right? It's because
No, I think it's very sad. I mean, I would say in the case of Germany, as in the case of Russia, there are definitely Russians who support this war as well. And we have to take that into consideration as we are exploring, diplomatic avenues to try to bring this to an end, and come up with ways that are going to be, despite Putin being a war criminal, face saving, so it can end in a way. And that's what diplomacy is supposed to do at its best.
Well, there's never a perfect solution that one side wins and the other loses. There has to be a meeting of the minds and this middle ground, right? As much as you may disagree with the other side, one of the best books I've ever read is about critical conversations, and a lot of it is about meeting in the middle. So should the show return to Russia, what impact do you think it would have now?
Well, it's impossible right now, of course. The show was canceled in 2010, and the cancellation happened at the same time that the Putin's regime was increasing its crackdown on independent media, and a show which originated in America was not particularly popular, to that regime. And eventually, those executives that Putin appointed to run the Russian TV station ORT, they canceled the show. So, we would really have to be in a very different environment with a very different landscape for Sesame Street to return to Russia. But of course, I have hope, and, all wars end. This war will end too. And when it does, we should be ready. We should be ready to see if there's an opportunity to bring a program like Sesame Street or other types of programs that encourage, openness and collaboration. So I am hopeful that this could happen in the future.
Well, I'm optimistic as well. I think when we end a conflict or a crisis, hopefully we learn some things from it and we come out of it with hurts and pain and losses, but also with some lessons learned and some growth. I think we have to have hope and faith in that. But
well, I really hope this war ends soon, because there are so many young people, getting killed. It's just horrible.
It's tragic. Well, Natasha, we really appreciate you being on the show. How can people reach out to you, either for the book or in anything else that you do? How can they get a hold of you?
I have a website. It's just my name, NatashaLanceRogoff.com, and the book and audiobook. The audiobook's fantastic. I did not narrate it, but it is a wonderful woman who speaks Russian as well. And so that is available on Amazon and other platforms, Spotify and Apple.
Well, I think I'll be your first customer. I was recently introduced to you and your story, and I most definitely look forward to reading the book. So thanks for being here. We really appreciate you. And congratulations on what you accomplished, the good that came out of it. And I'm sure the good that is continuing to impact at least a great number of the Russian, Ukrainian, and other people in that area. So my hat is off to you.
Thank you, Patrick. It's a wonderful show, and I really appreciate being on.
My pleasure. Thanks for listening, everybody. Come on back next week. Remember, certainty is out there. You can find it. We're here to help if we can. Have a great week.
Thanks for tuning into today's episode of Finding Certainty. We hope you've gained some more insight into how to create more certainty in your own business or nonprofit. Join us next week for another taste of the Certainty Experience. Until then, we wish you greater certainty in all that you do.